2024 coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. With something, listen, we've done quite a bit of it over the last couple weeks. It is transfer portal in college hoops. But what I want to do today is something a little bit different, right? Over the last probably 2-3 weeks, we've done the transfer portal kind of news and notes segment. Who's in the portal? Who's going where? Who's visiting who? Where is this school? All that good stuff. And so what I want to do now is something a little bit different. So the portal's been open 3 weeks now. And as I do every time around this year, on Thursday, I drop my transfer portal power rankings. In other words, the best players that are in the transfer portal right now, I rank them from 1, and I did 25 from 1 to 25. So I want to give you my rankings and kind of tell you who these players are, what you need to know, who's recruiting them. But I want to give you a few caveats before we get started. One, it is insanely hard to rank transfers. And I'm not saying like you should feel bad for me, like my life is so tough that I have to rank transfers. But it's just such a delicate thing because you're comparing, say, a 19-year-old kid with a lot of upside to a 4th or 5th year college player. You're comparing mid-major guys that average maybe 21, 22 points per game with high-major guys that only averaged 11 or 12. Well, what would they be like at the mid-major level, and what would the mid-major guys be like at the high-major level? So that is caveat 1. And then caveat 2 is that a lot of stuff is going to change. And I say that because just since I published my rankings on Thursday afternoon, there have been 2 more marquee portal additions. So let's get into my top 15 or so players in the transfer portal. And again, with the caveat, this is an ever-evolving thing. Some of these guys may be committed by the time you listen to this. Some of them may have set up visits. And oh, by the way, there may be some new players in there by the time you listen as well. Let's start at number 1. And what I can tell you is definitively there is a new number 1 since I published this list on Thursday morning. That is because on Thursday afternoon, Ace Baldwin, a 6'1" guard from VCU, who was the Atlantic 10 Player of the Year, entered the transfer portal. And so because of it, Ace Baldwin is officially my number 1 ranked player in the transfer portal. And as far as this piece of news, it's both very surprising and not surprising at all. It's shocking because the kid is just crazy talented and he's a really good college basketball player. But it's not shocking because I'm sure many of you have seen, I think it was Wednesday afternoon, Penn State officially hired VCU head coach Mike Rhodes as their head coach. So VCU's head coach leaves for Penn State. VCU then hires Ryan Odom, who was at Utah State, but was famously the head coach at UMBC. But I just bring it up to very simply say that the decision probably isn't that surprising because when the coach left, the kid decided, you know what, I'm going to open my options. And so while it's probably too early to know exactly where he will be recruited by, just know this. Any team that needs a lead guard, this is the phone number they're going to pick up. This is the call that they're going to make. Because Caleb Love, and we'll talk about him in a minute, Caleb Love has definitive pluses, but definitive minuses as well. I think Ace Baldwin from VCU has a lot of the upside with not a lot of the downside. Really good 6'1" lead guard, averaged almost 6 assists per game this year, 13 points per game. But he doesn't have the crazy shot selection, bad teammate vibe that Caleb Love does. So Ace Baldwin is officially my number 1 ranked player in the portal. Again, entirely too early to speculate on who will reach out. But I'm telling you, if your team needs a guard, a lead guard, this is a phone call that they will make. There's weirdly some, I'll say this. I don't think Kentucky is going to call, but there are some weirdly interesting Kentucky ties. Ace Baldwin played for the same AAU program for a while as Emmanuel Quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. But obviously Kentucky has Rob Dillingham coming in, DJ Wagner coming in, Antonio Reeves likely coming back. So I don't think it's a call they make. But I'm just saying is that just about everyone is going to reach out to this kid. And this kid does have very, very, very loose Kentucky ties. Let's keep it going at number 2. And it is the player we've talked about the most. And a player that I would argue is probably the most polarizing player in the transfer portal right now. That's our old buddy, Caleb Love. So listen, at this point, we know the deal with Caleb Love. I'm not going to go through his entire resume, But there is a very obvious negative with Caleb Love, and that's that his shot selection was terrible. His stats regressed this year. He shot under 30% from three-point land, under 40% from the field, really inefficient, basically didn't make anybody better, took a lot of bad shots, turned the ball over a lot. I still have him ranked very high, though, for this one reason. He is the only player in the transfer portal right now who has proven he can make big plays in the biggest games in college basketball, right? Because all these guys, whether it's a mid-major guy transferring up, a high-major guy that's already been there going somewhere else, even a guy that's had success, I've never seen those guys hit big buckets in Final Fours. I've never seen them score 30 points in a Sweet 16 like Caleb Love did 2 years ago against UCLA when he was daggers. I've never seen a guy, he's the only guy that will ever have essentially ended Coach K's career because of the shots he made in that Final Four where he had 28 points. So Caleb Love is polarizing. We get all that, but he is my number 2 ranked guard. And I'll just be curious to see, again, who actually reaches out. I've seen on social media already some trepidation from Missouri fans and other fan bases. Do we really want him? Would we really want him? I did a list a few episodes ago of where I think he could land. A name that seems to be really prevalent right now, Indiana, seems to be very interested in him. They have Xavier Johnson coming back. Would they add Caleb Love? Curious to see. I think it's early to speculate on Caleb Love, but he's going to land somewhere good, and he's a good player. But you got to take the pluses with the minuses. Let's go to number 3, another player that I talked about on the last episode, Kalel Ware, 6'11" guy, originally from Arkansas, just finished his freshman year at Oregon, and now he is in the transfer portal. And so what I would say about Kalel Ware, if you've never seen him, did not have a great freshman year, but part of it was he's 3,500 miles away from home, 3,000 miles away from home, whatever. And then 2, on top of that, it's also worth remembering that when it comes to Kalel Ware, Oregon had a veteran-loaded front court this year with N'Faly Dante, Nathan Bill, etc. And so because of it, this kid is now in the transfer portal. And, he is a 6'11", former McDonald's All-American with elite athleticism. So in the least surprising news ever, he is a player that is very highly coveted right now. Put out a list, I believe it was through Joe Tipton the other day. Gonzaga, Duke, Arkansas, most of the SEC. I know Ole Miss. Remember, Ole Miss is now coached by Chris Beard. Don't forget about that. So when Chris Beard and Ole Miss call, that now means something. The point I'm trying to make, the biggest names in college basketball are reaching out to this kid. I said it on last episode, but Paul Biancardi, ESPN recruiting expert, he said that in last year's class that included Brandon Miller and Nick Smith and Anthony Black and all those guys, that Kalel Ware had more upside than any of them. Didn't produce. We'll see where he ends up. It'll be very interesting to see where he ends up. Let's keep it going to number 4 on this list. Now, I'll kind of lump number 4 and number 5 together. 2 wings that have produced at the high major level. The first one, Brandon Miller. If Brandon Miller was in the portal, that'd be interesting, but he's going to the pros. I'm talking about Brandon Murray, from Georgetown. So he's a little bit of an interesting story. This is actually his second transfer in as many years. He was a guy who started his career for Will Wade and LSU. He was an all-SEC wing, 6'5" a year ago. Will Wade gets fired. He decides to transfer. He ends up at Georgetown near his hometown in the Baltimore, D.C. area. Well, now Patrick Ewing gets fired, and he decides to enter the transfer portal. And listen, there just aren't that many guys that have produced at the high major level like he has. This guy averaged 14 points a game in the Big East this year, 32% three-point shooting from a 6'5" guy with an NBA frame, defends. Again, don't know what the schools will be, but if you have a school that, listen, I think he's going to hear from everybody. We don't have a list yet. Wouldn't shock me if Gonzaga reaches out, Arkansas reaches out, Texas reaches out. He will be as high profile as anybody. And then I'll say this. We had another interesting high major wing enter the transfer portal literally as I got set to start recording today. And that is, how about this? Olivier Kangwa, who played the last 4 years at Tennessee, entered the transfer portal. This year, he averaged 10.5 points per game. Remember, he was coming off major knee surgery. He was kind of the guy. His breakout game was against Duke in the NCAA tournament, 27 points, 5 rebounds in that game. And he really was one of the few offensive bright spots for Tennessee. Was really good 2 years ago, gets hurt, comes back. It takes a while this year. And now he has that extra year of eligibility, and I think he just kind of wants to see what's out there. So again, that happened late Thursday, right as I got set to record. And so again, there's no way to know where he is going to end up, but Olivier Kangwa is a name to know on top of all the other ones that I've said. Really quickly, I want to rip through some other ones because I get a feeling this segment's already going long. 2 mid-major players that I like, well, really 3 mid-major players that I like a lot, and based on who is recruiting them, people like a lot as well. And one thing about mid-major players, I get it. It is tough to evaluate how a guy is going to make the leap from a mid-major to a high major, which all of these guys are recruiting. But what I will also acknowledge is I do think the last few years, I have kind of undervalued the mid-major guys in my rankings, and we're starting to see those guys have a major impact at the high major level. Mark Sears at Alabama this year, Antonio Reeves at Kentucky this year. You go Jabari Rice at Texas this year. Arkansas through the years have had guys that have seamlessly transitioned to the SEC. And so I just bring it up because I am no longer the guy that's going to hold it against a guy. Well, he hasn't played at the power conference level. I don't know if it really matters at this point. So 3 names to know. The first one, this should sound familiar. How about this? Jameer Nelson Jr. Yes, if you're feeling old, Jameer Nelson Jr. is a 4th-year player who just finished his 4th year in college basketball. Ironically, he actually started college ball at George Washington, playing for my buddy Jamie and Christian, who does stuff for Aaron Torres Media. Transfers after 2 years, leads Delaware to the NCAA tournament last year, 20 points per game this year. And what I would say about Jameer Nelson, if you watched his dad play, very similar, undersized guard, but tough as hell. What's interesting is just knowing Jamie, and I know that Jameer Nelson was a little bit late to late to basketball in general, kind of one of those kids, didn't want to play just because dad did. And then he kind of found his way there. By the time he gets to college, he turns into a very good college basketball player, 20 points per game at Delaware this year. Be curious to where he ends up. It's been a very quiet recruitment so far. I just think the family doesn't really care. They don't need the hoopla. They don't need the hype. Just curious to where he ends up. He will be somewhere good. Let's keep it going. Another name that's very interesting. Dalton Kennett, 6'7" forward from Northern Colorado, 21 points per game this year, 38% from 3. You know who he reminds me of? Remember Baylor Shireman, who played at Creighton this year, was a transfer a year ago from South Dakota State? This kid's kind of got the same game. Athletic, passing, shooting, and he's a guy that I believe will be able to step in and make a major impact at the high major level immediately. Among the schools that have reached out to him, North Carolina wants him bad. So if North Carolina wants you, you could play. Indiana wants him bad. If Indiana wants you, you could play. Illinois as well. Really good player. Dalton Kennett of Northern Colorado, a name to know. Final mid-major guy, then we'll rip through some others. Denver Jones, 21 points per game this year at Florida International, about 6'3", 6'4" guard. He's originally from Alabama, super athletic, just gets to the rim, just a very impressive player. He has entered the portal, and from my understanding, he is a high priority for Nate Oates in Alabama. We will see if Denver Jones is a factor at Alabama. Couple other names to know. TJ Bamba, Washington State's leading scorer. He's originally from New York, so he averaged 17 points per game this year. He's got ties to the West Coast from the Pac-12. He's got ties to the East Coast from Washington State, or from where he grew up, and he's been reached out to by everybody. Now, UConn appears to have made him a priority. UConn is not going after very much in the portal, but they need a guy to replace Jordan Hawkins on the wing. He appears to be one of their priorities. Arizona, which is very coy and kind of secretive about who they reach out to, has definitely reached out to this guy. So those are some names to know there. A couple other names. Reese Dixon Waters was the Pac-12 Sixth Man of the Year at USC. Versatile wing, 6'6", all that good stuff. He is in the portal. Everybody's reached out to him. Alabama, Arkansas, etc. Khalif Battle, wing from Temple. He is in the portal. Walter Clayton Jr. We've talked about him. He was at Iona, leading scorer. He is choosing between his home state of Florida and St. John's following Rick Pitino. I think we'll get a decision soon. Graham Ike from Wyoming, double-double machine, all Mountain West first team 2 years ago, was injured this year. Couple other names. Kari Oquendo from Georgia, second leading scorer, elite athlete. Caleb Mills, Florida State, entered the portal. And then Kirk Kriisa. Listen, controversial, whatever. He is going to be an impact player at the high major level.